Where is that fine line, having crossed which we can assume that a person has cheated on you? Are thoughts of cheating considered cheating? Or are these some specific actions? The wife was morally determined to change her husband and took all actions to do so. But at the very last moment, something happened that made her rethink her action. "Jeff, your taxi's here. You need to move quickly," Marie shouted to her husband, who was nearly done packing. He was behind schedule, a fact she attributed to his reluctance to leave, evident in his efforts to delay his departure. Nonetheless, it was imperative he leave, especially for this significant trip. Reaching the top of the stairs, he responded, "I'll be right down. Tell the driver to start the meter, and I'll hurry." Marie motioned to the cabbie, closed the door, and leaned against it, awaiting Jeff, her partner of 23 years. She shared his reluctance to part, but understood it was unavoidable. The impending merger was on the brink of finalization, promising Jeff a promotion to vice president in the newly amalgamated company. This advancement meant financial security, elevated status, and more quality time together, something they both desired. Yet the journey had been arduous and protracted, with potential consequences for their marriage that neither were willing to overlook. Jeff rushed down the stairs, his lengthy salt and pepper hair cascading over his face as his green eyes blazed with irritation. At 48, he stood tall, lean, and robust, exuding handsomeness and vitality. As the chief financial officer for Baldwin Enterprises, a global financial powerhouse with stakes in numerous major corporations, Jeff was adept at money conversions. A single timely phone call could yield millions for his company. His expertise demanded his presence in Brussels within the next 24 hours, with a corporate jet awaiting him at Teterboro Airport in Bergen County, NJ. Grabbing his overnight bag and donning his wool topcoat, Jeff retrieved his briefcase from the table, where Marie had placed it in anticipation. Tenderly, he lifted her chin with his free hand, gazing into her eyes. "I'll ring you once I've checked in and share the contact details. I detest this, but if it pans out, it'll be the last trip for a while. I still wish you could join me." Marie gazed into his clear green eyes, familiar to her. "Everything will be all right. Just come back quickly so we can make our plans. I'll miss you. I love you." Jeff leaned down to kiss her lightly on the lips before stepping back. "I love you too. Behave while I'm away. I'll call you at work." With that, he hurried out the door, his briefcase swinging as he dashed towards the waiting cab. He opened the nearest door, stowed his belongings inside, and then circled around to wave once more before sliding into the back seat. The cab pulled away immediately, its destination already known. As it disappeared down the street of their neighborhood, Marie shivered, watching it vanish. A small tremor of fear mingled with the usual sadness she felt whenever he departed. She fervently wished he wasn't leaving this time. Marie and Jeff Sullivan resided and worked in urban New Jersey, in close proximity to New York City, with access to all the advantages of the financial world, which was Jeff's expertise. They had been married for over 23 years and had raised 2 sons, both of whom had left home. The eldest, Bill, was married and residing in New Brunswick, while Johnny was still in college, pursuing a master's degree in finance, following in his father's footsteps. Jeff earned a good income, and they had successfully paid off their son's college loans, achieving financial security once again. Both of them continued working, Jeff for their future and Marie for personal fulfillment. Marie went back indoors and prepared for work. She worked as an assistant to the senior manager at Garden State Realtors, a company specializing in industrial real estate. She had been with the firm for over 7 years, and her boss, Janet Billings, was also a close friend. They had witnessed the firm's growth and expansion together, and Marie now held a favorable position with a decent salary. Though Jeff earned more than they could ever need, Marie appreciated having her own money for gifts, special purchases, and other personal expenses. It might seem trivial, but it brought her joy, and Jeff didn't seem to mind, as long as she found pleasure in it. Today she took extra care in selecting her outfit, opting for a white silk blouse with a scalloped neckline, a black skirt featuring a side slit, and a gold chain belt. Around her neck, she wore a delicate gold chain adorned with a small circle encrusted with diamonds, complemented by matching earrings. After meticulously applying makeup, she stepped back to assess her appearance. Satisfied, she admired her slim and firm figure, a result of years of keeping herself in shape. A dab of perfume was the final touch. Content with her ensemble, she noticed the faint worry lines on her face before turning away. Returning downstairs, she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the table, contemplating her day. Her thoughts drifted to Jeff, wondering where he might be at that moment, likely in transit. The thought of him made her shiver, anticipating her plans while he was away. Her mind then wandered to Dan Plummer, the newest member of the Garden State team, recalling their conversation from the day before. Dan was nearly a decade younger than her, strikingly handsome, clearly devoted to his fitness regimen. Ever since he joined the office 6 weeks ago, the women couldn't stop gossiping about him. Some of them, especially the single or separated ones, secretly hoped he'd make a move, but so far, he hadn't. He was an excellent salesman, and Janet had asked her to assist him with the necessary paperwork and procedures to comply with local regulations. As they worked together on several deals, she noticed him casting lingering glances her way. Initially flattered by the attention, she began to wonder about his intentions. She felt a warmth and excitement whenever he was near, especially when their hands touched casually, sending a rush of heat through her. His habit of gently brushing her hair away from her face only added to her confusion and heightened emotions. His bright blue eyes seemed to darken with desire whenever they locked gazes, stirring a sense of pure lust within her that she found both flattering and unsettling. Despite her discomfort, she couldn't shake the forbidden thoughts and feelings Dan evoked in her. She knew she shouldn't be entertaining such thoughts about any man other than her husband, and it made her anxious, yet she couldn't suppress them. As the weeks went by, the intensity of her emotions whenever Dan was nearby grew to the point of becoming almost unbearable. She was on the verge of speaking to Janet and requesting a different colleague be assigned to him when Jeff announced his upcoming trip to Brussels, Belgium. It was then that she found herself contemplating what it would be like to spend that time with Dan while Jeff was away. The mere thought sent a rush of heat up her neck to her cheeks, and her heart started to race. It was absurd. This wasn't right. She loved Jeff more than anything and had never entertained such thoughts before. What was happening to her? Perhaps it was just a foolish teenage crush, exacerbated by Jeff's frequent travels due to the hectic merger. She simply missed her husband, that's all. Soon enough, everything would return to normal. She had maintained composure until yesterday afternoon. As she conversed with Jeff on the phone, inquiring about his schedule upon arrival in Brussels, she observed Dan eavesdropping. Catching his eye, he feigned interest in a property brochure, though she sensed he was attentive to her conversation with Jeff. Ending the call, she resumed writing the letter at her desk, only to have Dan join her and strike up a conversation. Pausing, she pondered his intentions until he posed a question that would alter her world. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Was that Jeff, your husband?" Marie nodded, and he continued, "I understand you'll be alone tomorrow evening, and I wondered if you'd like to join me for dinner. Just a quiet dinner, to get to know each other better." He reached over to brush her hair back, a gesture he often made. She felt a flush of warmth where he touched her, meeting the darkening of his ease with a nod. "That would be lovely, Dan. We could leave from here, I suppose. You could either bring me back after dinner to pick up my car, or I could follow you. Either way works for me." Just like that, dinner with another man while her husband was away. No one would know, and she could explore what it was like to be with him if only for a few hours over dinner. No harm, no foul. Isn't that what they say? Great. It's a plan. I'll drive and we can retrieve your car later. I know a fantastic spot just off the main highway out of town. Good food, a nice lounge. We can grab some drinks afterward and maybe even dance. Sound good to you? Absolutely. But just to be clear, this is just a friendly dinner. Nothing more, you understand. Just because I'll be alone for the evening, that's all. Just friends. Of course. Just friends. Dan smiled, placing a hand over hers and giving a reassuring squeeze. The touch felt intimate, and her heart fluttered. What am I doing? She thought. This could be very risky. She needed to reconsider. This wasn't right. She was about to speak up when Dan withdrew his hand, stood up, and walked away. Just as she was about to call out to him, Janet emerged from her office, inquiring about the letter. Marie promised to finish it promptly and forgot about Dan. By the time she left for the day, he was already gone. She found herself committed to dinner with him the following night. That evening, Marie experienced a shift in her feelings. She acknowledged that part of it stemmed from her upcoming plans once Jeff departed for Brussels, but another part prompted her to reconsider her priorities. She understood that Jeff's actions were in line with their discussions. She recognized that his pursuit was essential for securing the VP position at the new company, which would ultimately lead to positive changes in their lives: more financial stability, elevated status, and increased opportunities for travel and pursuing their dreams. Jeff's endeavors were not solely for his own benefit, but also for hers and the betterment of their marriage. So why was she entertaining thoughts of her own intentions? She couldn't provide an answer, except for the unsettling mix of danger and excitement that arose whenever she thought of Dan Plummer. Even now, the sensation of heat in her belly at the thought of him was disconcerting. Marie and Jeff discussed their upcoming trip, with him inquiring about her plans while he was away. She mentioned owing her sister a visit and likely spending the evening with her. Cheryl, who lived nearby, wasn't someone Marie spent much time with. Aware of the strained relationship between Jeff and Cheryl, Marie knew Jeff wouldn't bother contacting her during his absence. Jeff accepted this and shifted his focus elsewhere. Marie found herself preoccupied with thoughts of Jeff's trip, the upcoming weekend, and their vacation plans for the next few weeks, which involved visiting their cabin in the Catskills. This was a cherished destination for Marie, and they had been going there together for the past decade, initially with their sons until they went off to college and then just the two of them. She had to go to bed early because Jeff had to get up at 6:30. It has become rare for them to make love during the week lately, and tonight was no exception. Marie felt that this was a topic they needed to discuss and improve in their marriage. Lately, their desire had waned, which was unfortunate because she adored intimacy with Jeff. He was a fantastic lover, attentive and skillful. She always enjoyed being with him. However, thoughts of Dan involuntarily crossed her mind. She tried to drive them away, but she couldn't. Eventually, she got up and went to the bathroom to pull herself together. An hour later, she returned to bed. She felt stupid and embarrassed, but Jeff was fast asleep and didn't notice what was happening to his wife. Despite this, she tried her best to get a good night's sleep that night. The next morning, she got up at 5:30 while Jeff was in the shower. Putting on her robe, she headed downstairs to prepare coffee for him. He typically only had coffee, skipping breakfast as usual. He'd likely eat during the flight. With a corporate jet at their disposal, equipped with a full kitchen and an attendant, traveling wasn't too shabby, as she knew from past trips with him. By the time he came downstairs, the coffee was ready, and they chatted briefly before he had to leave. She kissed him goodbye, promising to worry until his return. He chuckled, assuring her it was just a short trip and he'd be back before she knew it. Although Jeff had invited her along, she had too much to do for Janet. That was before Dan had proposed dinner. Had she anticipated the offer, she might have found a way to join Jeff, avoiding temptation. But now it was too late. She got up from the kitchen table, realizing that her wandering thoughts had kept her occupied until it was time to head to work. After tidying up the kitchen, she put on her coat and drove for 30 minutes. She arrived at her desk promptly at 8:45, her usual start time, and prepared for the day ahead. One of her first tasks was to brew coffee and check the overnight emails for Janet. She completed both tasks and returned to her desk by 9:00, just as Dan approached her. Though she felt a brief moment of panic, she quickly composed herself into the professional she was. "Are we still meeting up tonight? I've booked a table at Michael's on the bypass. It's fantastic, great food, and very intimate. By the way, you look stunning. Absolutely stunning." He smiled, locking eyes with her. Once again, she felt that thrill of pleasure when he looked at her, a sensation stirring between her thighs. All her doubts melted away as she swallowed and replied softly, "It sounds wonderful. I'll be ready around 5:30. Janet will be leaving at 5:00 for a closing, so I can head out shortly after. Should I meet you at your car? Perfect. I'll be ready and eagerly anticipating it. I'm sure we'll have a fantastic time. He smiled, brushing her cheek with his fingers and trailing them gently across her lips. She quivered at his touch, and he grinned even wider. He glanced up and spotted Janet approaching. Standing up, he retrieved a file from his briefcase and began outlining the modifications he needed her to make as she reached the desk. It was all perfectly reasonable, and Janet nodded in agreement as she paused to listen. He seemed remarkably composed and unruffled. Briefly, she pondered whether he had done this many times before. Pushing that notion aside, as it was too distressing to dwell on, Janet proceeded into her office, while Marie got up to sort the mail for her. Dan offered her a final smile before departing. The day progressed as usual. Around 1:30 in the afternoon, she received a call from Jeff, who was in Brussels and was arranging transportation to the hotel. He simply wanted to chat, expressing how much he missed her already. She was delighted to hear from him, and they conversed for about 10 minutes as he sorted out the car and driver logistics. They shared a laugh over the language barrier Jeff encountered at the rental counter. His struggles with the clerk's poor English made communication difficult. Nonetheless, everything was sorted out, and Jeff promised to share the car's number later. As they ended the call, Jeff's parting words were, "I love you," to which she reciprocated before hanging up. She sat there gazing at her phone, contemplating whether to call Dan and cancel when he approached her. "Was that Jeff you were speaking with?" Your face lit up during the conversation. "You must care for him deeply." "It's evident," he remarked, gently stroking her cheek and discreetly checking their surroundings for any onlookers. "I understand. It adds to your allure." He stood up and strolled away, leaving her in a mix of confusion and excitement. Despite her deep love for Jeff, she struggled to comprehend the sway Dan held over her. It seemed that his mere touch rendered her powerless to defy him. She acknowledged that the evening ahead might be a mistake, yet she eagerly anticipated it. Conflicted, yet eager to spend time alone with Dan, she pushed aside thoughts of potential consequences. "Just dinner, nothing beyond that," she told herself. Immersing herself in work, she postponed any other considerations. Just before 4 Jeff returned the call. He provided her with a phone number and outlined his plans for the evening and the following day. He would depart for the States at 3 in the afternoon local time, arriving home well past 4 in the morning. It was the best he could manage, as he was eager to avoid spending another night there. He preferred to rest on the plane during the return journey. Marie agreed. After some discussion, she suggested he refrain from calling that evening, unless it was urgent. She informed him that she would be with Cheryl, but if he needed to reach her, he should call her cell. He agreed, acknowledging that he likely wouldn't call due to the time difference, and they bid each other good night. It was nearly 10 p.m. there, signaling it was time for him to retire for the night. Traveling took its toll, and he loaded it, so he planned to unwind and sleep. As she hung up, she realized she had just instructed her husband not to disturb her planned meeting with Dan. The realization filled her with guilt rather than excitement. How could she betray him like this? What was happening to her? She rushed to the bathroom to compose herself, feeling like a complete mess. While scrutinizing her reflection in the mirror, she pondered the reasons behind her actions. She recognized that her loneliness, exacerbated by Jeff's prolonged absence in recent months, played a significant role. Despite understanding Jeff's reasons for being away, she still found herself feeling lonely and frustrated most of the time. Moreover, she was troubled by the grip Dan had on her. Merely catching his gaze made her heart race and her cheeks flush. She struggled to resist the urge to succumb to him instantly. She felt compelled to rid herself of him from her system, even if it meant spending one night with him. She believed she had little choice in the matter. Ultimately, she reasoned that Jeff would never find out, and upon his return, they could restore the intimacy they once shared as husband and wife. He would remain unaware and unharmed by her actions. She hoped that by giving in to her irrational desire for Dan, she could close the door on it for good. She returned to her desk, feeling somewhat calmer yet still filled with excitement. Tonight would satisfy this longing, this desire. Jeff would be asleep in another country, leaving her with this night to herself. With this justification in mind, she completed her tasks, tidied her desk, bid Janet good night upon leaving, and then made one final visit to the bathroom to prepare for her date with Dan. At precisely 5:30, she shut down her computer and headed out to meet Dan near his car. They were the only two remaining in the parking lot. Dan awaited her, a smile adorning his handsome face, keys spinning in his hand. As she drew nearer, he walked around to the passenger side, holding the door open for her. Pausing before getting in, she met his gentle kiss on the lips. Returning the kiss, she settled into the passenger seat as Dan joined her, and they set off. Dinner was delightful. They enjoyed lobster served with drawn butter, accompanied by a tasty wild rice and vegetable side, followed by a fresh fruit salad drizzled with a sweet sauce, all paired with a dry white wine. For dessert, they savored sorbet alongside hot spiced tea. The entire experience was flawless. She ate heartily, matching the excellence of the meal, and Dan proved to be the perfect companion. Their conversation was lively and entertaining. He frequently reached out to touch her hand and would occasionally gaze into her eyes while she made insightful remarks. She felt as though she were reliving her first high school date with the boy of her dreams. It exceeded all her expectations. Though there lingered a hint of unease and guilt, she managed to push it aside. This was something she was determined to see through to the end. It had to be done. After dinner, they went to the hall where the live band was performing. It was still early, just after 8, so the hall wasn't full yet. They chose a table at the back of the room, ordered drinks, and sat down at it together. Dan snuggled up to her, their arms entwined on the table, their bodies touching from hip to hip. She felt a warmth spreading through her. Just being with Dan cheered her up a lot. Sensing her attraction, he gently placed his hand on her hip, while the other continued to squeeze her palm. She continued talking as his hand began stroking her thigh, and her concern only made him smile wider. After only a few seconds, she took her hand away, but it was enough for desire to flare up between them. She opened her eyes and glanced around to check for any observers. No one seemed to be paying attention, but the location was too exposed. She expressed her concerns to Dan, who acknowledged them by swiftly examining the check and tossing several bills onto the table. Rising to his feet, he extended his hand to help her up, suggesting, "We should depart now." She trailed behind him as they exited the lounge and entered the lobby. Pausing, he gazed intently into her eyes and asked, "Should I book us a room here at the hotel? Is that what you want? I really desire it, but only if you're willing." It only took her a moment to make a decision. "No, take me to my car and then you can walk me home. I would prefer to continue the date on my own territory." She decided that if she continued, it would be on her own terms. They could have an empty room. She refused to stain her husband's bed with her betrayal, and would not have gone down to a date in a shabby motel room. It might be stupid pride, but it was pride nonetheless. Dan walked her to his car, and together they drove back to the office, where her car was waiting. He didn't say much all the way, but he took her hand and squeezed it tightly. Although she wanted to say something, the words wouldn't come out of her mouth. At every traffic light, Dan brought her hand to his lips, and once even put it on his lap. Pulling away, she kept her hands folded in her lap for the rest of the trip. Dan gave her a worried look, but she reassured him with a smile, and he relaxed. Upon arrival, she got into her car, and they went to her house. They still have the whole night ahead. It's almost 9:30. Driving alone, she once again wondered if this was really what she wanted. The answer lay in her body's reaction. Remembering the feeling of his touch in the salon, she smiled to herself. Yes, she craved it, and it seemed that he was a master at fulfilling her desires. Looking forward to it more and more, she pulled into the driveway of her house, Dan following her closely. Opening the garage door, she parked and waited for him to enter before closing it. Inside, she lit up the kitchen while turning off the outside lights. Throwing off her coat, she turned around and saw that Dan was watching her. She helped him take off his jacket, which he casually threw on a chair, as she led him into the dimly lit living room. She stood in the room, watching him, and he looked at her with undisguised desire. Opening his arms, he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her even closer to him. She felt his desire and was surprised to find herself with another man in her house, whom she had met a few months ago. Perhaps she needed Dan's youthful energy to revive her bed life, because she hadn't felt this way with her husband in a very long time. She wanted this moment to be special, so instead of staying in the living room, she whispered to Dan to take her to the bedroom upstairs. He lifted her easily and carried her up the stairs, and she wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his chest. Once in the guest room, he carefully lowered her to the floor. With a grateful smile, he sat her down on the edge of the bed and stood in front of her, still smiling. When she bent down to work with her mouth, she was startled by the sudden ringing of her mobile phone. It was in the small purse she had brought upstairs, and now it was lying next to the bed. The sudden call startled Dan, and she noticed a flash of annoyance on his face as she walked away. "Don't answer the phone. This is more important. Please let him call." She realized that it must be Jeff. He was the only one who could call at such a late hour. It had to be Jeff or, God forbid, one of the guys with the bad news. She had no choice but to respond. "I have to answer. At this hour, it could be my husband or one of my children. I had to. Just be quiet while I answer." Looking at him, who was fully prepared for the upcoming night, she almost laughed at the absurdity of the situation. "Come here," she said, in an attempt to ease his frustration. She grabbed the phone and checked who was calling. It was Jeff. Oh my God, at a time like this? It must have been 3:30 a.m. where he was. What could have happened? She opened her phone. "Hello, Jeff. Oh my God, Jeff, what happened? What happened?" "It's all wrong, Marie. Absolutely everything. I woke up here in this bed in this strange country, and you're not with me. That's what's wrong. This is all wrong." She felt the pain in his voice keenly, and it broke her heart. Her Jeff was suffering, and she couldn't be there to support him. "Talk to me, my love. Tell me what's on your mind. Come on, Jeff. Open up to me. I'm right here, right beside you, darling." Without hesitation, she let go of Dan's hand and sat up straight on the edge of the bed. Jeff was her priority now. Dan faded into the background as she focused solely on comforting her husband. "I know we made a deal, Marie. We agreed that I would handle the travel and do whatever it takes to finalize this merger and secure the promotion. I know we agreed, but I loathe it. I hate being away from you and our home. I despise communicating over the phone instead of being together in bed, our minds and bodies connected. I yearn for that every moment I'm away from you. I abhor this." Mary stood up, brushing past a curious Dan, and entered the bathroom, shutting the door behind her. As she moved away swiftly, she spoke, intending to keep the conversation with her husband confidential, wanting Dan to be excluded. With the door closed, she spoke softly to her husband. "I understand, darling. I miss you too. It's tough being apart, but you'll be back home tomorrow night. We'll finally be together, and the traveling will almost be over. We're so close, darling. Just talk to me, and we'll make it through. I'm here, listening." She continued to comfort him, knowing his state of mind well and knowing just what to do. She lingered, observing whether he would improve. He grappled with depression, isolation, far from his familiar surroundings. He had displayed remarkable resilience for an extended period, constantly adapting to new environments, new accommodations, new countries, yet always grappling with solitude at night, after everyone else had retired to their own sanctuaries. Jeff couldn't do that. He remained solitary, much like her, except she found solace in her current surroundings, enveloped by the familiar and cherished. She possessed the comforts of home, companionship, and proximity to friends, with everything she required at her fingertips. Jeff lacked any semblance of home comforts. The realization struck her so profoundly, it stole her breath away. Suddenly she remembered Dan, who was still there, exactly as she had left him. Only now his expression was distorted with anger and disappointment. The intense desire and anticipation she had felt when she saw him earlier had completely disappeared. When she looked at her reflection in the mirror, her disheveled hair and face still burning with desire, she suddenly realized that the whole situation disgusted her. What was she thinking? How stupid she was to even think about such a terrible thing. She needed to put an end to this immediately. "Jeff, I'm home now. I decided not to go to my sister's tonight. Please listen to me. I have your number. Let me go downstairs and call you on the landline. My cell phone is about to die and I don't want to lose our conversation. So please hang up and I'll call you right back. Can you wait for me?" Jeff's reply was so tender it nearly broke her heart. "Yes, I can wait. But don't take too long, Marie. I really need to talk to you now. It's a tough night, honey. Really tough. I need you, Marie. I need you so much." "I understand, Jeff. Just hang up now, and I'll call you in a few minutes. Hang up, okay? Okay, Jeff?" "Okay." And the line went silent. She stood there in her home's bathroom, on the verge of tears. She realized that her husband's pain was the key to saving her marriage and her love. His pain was all she needed to remember. She was so close to throwing everything away. Gathering herself, she opened the door to find Dan standing there with a hopeful smile, thinking they would resume where they left off. But his smile faded as he saw her expression. "Dan, you need to leave now. This was a mistake, and I almost made it worse. But I'm okay now. I understand what I was about to do was wrong and could have cost me everything I hold dear. I almost sacrificed it all for this, for you. I'm sorry, Dan, but this can't happen. I love my husband, and I can't do this to him. I finally understand what I have and what I stand to lose." She understood now, so clearly. Thank God for Jeff's call. Dan was livid. "God damn it, Marie. You can't pull this on me. You lure me here, make all these promises, and then change your mind? Just because your idiotic husband called? Just because he's feeling a little lonely? Well, it's tough luck that he's not here, and I am. That's why you're here too, because he left you high and dry without any love. Remember, I could have chosen any of those fools at the office, but I chose you. Now let's pick up where we left off." With that, Dan reached out to push her back onto the bed. She twisted away from him, but he persisted. Crack! The sound reverberated loudly in the confined space as she slapped him across the face with all her might. She felt the sting in her palm as it connected with his haughty expression. Her resolve was bolstered by his disdainful words about her husband and their relationship. "You idiot!" That seemed to have an impact. Dan blinked, stepped back, and touched his face where she had hit him. He gazed at her, the disarray and lust-fading, replaced by bewilderment and fury. Marie was scared by his expression, but also determined to stand her ground. She confronted him with her head held high, her arms straight at her sides, and her small fists clenched. He noticed her resolve, hesitated for a moment, then relented. With an effort to retain some dignity, he pulled up his trousers, zipped them up, and fastened his belt. Once composed, he headed towards the door. Pausing, he glanced at her one last time and spat. "Your loss, bitch. It could have been amazing, but you messed up. Too bad. I'll just have to find someone more eager to have some fun." He exited as Marie hastily grabbed a robe to cover herself. She trailed Dan downstairs and watched as he left through the front door. Locking it behind him, she breathed a sigh of relief and returned to the kitchen to call Jeff. She dialed the number, briefly conversed with the operator who then connected her to Jeff's room. All she wanted was to speak to her husband, to express her deep love for him and her longing for his return home. As the phone rang on the other end, she glanced around at the humble kitchen table and chairs that had been witness to their journey through raising 2 kids and almost 15 years of marriage. Her gaze settled on the small crack along one edge, a remnant of Bill's past obsession with bowling. It was oddly beautiful to her now, and she couldn't fathom giving up such memories. Chuckling at the absurdity of her thoughts, she was interrupted by Jeff's voice on the line. When he inquired about her laughter, she simply confessed her love for him more than anything else in the world. They conversed deep into the night before finally saying their goodbyes. The following night, as planned, Jeff returned home, and Marie, wide awake, eagerly awaited his arrival. Positioned at the door, she greeted him with open arms and a tender kiss as soon as the taxi dropped him off. Jeff was back in his rightful place, and Marie felt relieved that she had halted herself before jeopardizing their marriage. The near miss served as a poignant reminder of all she held dear, reaffirming her love for her husband. Reflecting on her past mistakes, she acknowledged the deep sense of shame they brought upon her, driving her to vow never to be swayed by any temptation again. She made a solemn promise to herself to make amends and to dedicate herself fully to him, swearing before all she held sacred to repent for her transgressions. Jeff, having secured the promotion, ascended to the position of the latest vice president within the newly established corporation, the fruit of his relentless dedication. As pledged, his necessity for travel diminished considerably, yet occasional opportunities for journeys to exotic locales with top-notch accommodations still arose. Following deliberations with Jeff, she resigned from her job, enabling her to accompany him wherever his ventures took him. Henceforth, he never embarked on his travels alone. She assumed her rightful place by his side. As Marie prepared her luggage for a trip to Hawaii with Jeff, she reminisced about that day nearly 3 years prior, recalling how close she had come to making a tragic error.
That's the end of the story. Write your opinion in the comments about this story. It will be interesting for us to read it. Also, do not forget to like and subscribe to our channel so as not to miss new, equally interesting and exciting stories. Good luck!